camera for a minute so I know you're present and you can turn it right back off. Boom, boom. Got you. Nice. All right, we're missing 3. Cool. All right, so we're going to do a fun demo on how to burnish and do stencils. So we sort of went over coiling. Let me pop off my mask, the door is shut. So we did coiling last class period. This class period we're going to sort of go over burnishing. Does that look focused-ish? No? We're going to come a little closer. All right, that's better. So I've got some pieces of clay we're going to sort of go over. So when your clay is leather hard and you're ready to burnish with your TerraSig, and I've got a little bit of white TerraSig over here. Make sure, especially the white, because I had to give it a good mix earlier today, to like give it a good like stirring with a paintbrush or shake it up, make sure all the water hasn't settled out. So when we go to do our burnishing, I've done one coat here. It's still pretty transparent. So it usually will dry pretty quickly if your piece isn't super wet. So you can usually go over and do your multiple coats fairly fast. But if it's pretty wet, it won't like let the thing dry. So we're just going to set that aside for a minute. Come back to it when it's dry. So I made this piece, if I can zoom it out a little bit. This is my coil pod. I'll just turn it this way. It's in a style of Magdalena Dando. It's about 18 inches tall. And I've sort of already started burnishing. So right here, I've done black, and here and sort of the petal opening part, I've done terracotta. So it should be orange here and black here. Oh my gosh, okay. That is not working. Cool, that's a lot better. So I've already started burnishing the outside here, so it's a little glossy, but I haven't really touched the inner part here because I wanted to leave that for y'all to show. So my piece is leather hard. It's probably as leather hard as it gets. I can squeeze it here, I can knock on it. It does not crumble, it does not squish, it holds its shape, and that's really the key thing we're looking for when we're talking about leather hard. So you'll know your piece is leather hard when it gets to this point. It's still cold, it's still got that chemical water, but it's not flopping over. It's holding its shape pretty rigidly. I can lean it, over on the table like that, and it's not trying to conform to the shape of the table. So when you go to burnish, and I'm not going to burnish down here because if I add any more, it'll mess up. I'm going to get a little bit of this petroleum jelly. You can use any sort of like lubricant at home. I think coconut oil works really well. Crisco, olive oil. You don't need a lot of, I use petroleum jelly because it's shelf stable, and that's the big thing. I don't have to worry about it going bad. You could even use butter, like if you wanted. And I just grabbed a little bit on my thumb, and I'm just going to rub it into the surface of my pot. And it doesn't need a lot. Like a little will go a very long way. And you don't want to really oversaturate it with whatever you're going to use, because if you oversaturate it, sometimes the shine of the oil will look like the shine of the burnishing, and we'll think we have it, but we don't have it. We've not done enough. So I like to use two things. I've got just a regular metal spoon. I'm going to use the back of it. I've also got like a river rock. You can just steal these from pretty much anywhere. I stole mine from outside of the art building. Don't tell anybody. But I'm going to use this spoon because when I got curved things like this, something about the handle is just a little nicer to sort of burnish with. So I'm going to just hit it on the sides here. And we're just going to... And so what we're doing chemically is, when we talked about those clay platelets aligning, we are lining up those platelets. And when we line up our plates, what happens is it creates a nice glossy sheen. We're allowing those glass formers to really shine through. And when you get to the point where you're burnishing, sometimes it takes a little bit. So I would recommend, just putting on your TV series, on your laptop, your podcast, whatever, and just hold it in your lap very carefully. Like, I like to make my openings as large as my arm, so I can just put it on here and just go for it. But make this a mindless activity. So you can it's repetitive motion. You can just sit and knock it out maybe in an hour or so, a couple episodes. It doesn't have to be like a super attentive activity. Just make sure, you're getting that nice glossy sheen. I'm just going to go and do my next coat of Terra-Sig on this other thing. And you don't want to do your burnishing until you've allowed your Terra Sigillata to dry. I know. And the reason is because if it's not dry, you're just going to pick up pigment. So you'll just have it'll just be a big mess. So when we get to the point where we're decorating our pots, really think about color composition, what's going to go together, how it's going to go. Yes and no. So if you've got it to a point, because it'll burnish without the oil, but if it's a little too dry, the oil helps. It'll create a little sturdiness. So sometimes you hit it at exactly the right moment, and you can burnish it without any oil. But I'm going to assume that we're all going to struggle, because I struggled a little bit to catch it. But yes, with a little bit of oil. And like I said, I have a bunch of jars of this here at the studio. If you don't want to go buy anything, you can grab a little coconut oil or olive oil out of your kitchen. Butter will work probably. Heck, I even think maybe like a little lotion might be okay, because it's all going to burn out. It's not forever. It's just to sort of reinforce your structure while you're burnishing. And while you're burnishing, I like to keep a little towel or sponge with me nearby, because you'll get a little bit of like residue on the outside of on the outside of whatever you choose to burnish with, and I just like to wipe that off every now and again and just keep going. But yes, Skylar, oil. We're going to talk about stencils. So stencils, and this is sort of something to think about. I'm going to move this pot over. We're going to wait for this to dry. So I just have sketchbook paper here. Depending on how complex your stencils are, like if they really need to curve, I would recommend doing a thinner paper, something like printer paper or newsprint, just so that way you can bend it around the surface of your pot a little bit. When we do our stencils, I really want y'all to think about that definition of matte to glossy, because wherever we put our stencil down, that will remain glossy. So if I put it on my burnished pot now, and I paint over it, what's going to happen is everywhere I've painted over with that next coat of Terra Sig, that's not, and I don't burnish, obviously I'm not burnishing the new coat, that will stay matte. So when I peel off my stencil, everything underneath that stencil will be glossy. So when we do our designs, think about that. And remember, those are due tonight, y'all. So whoever hasn't turned one in, get on it. So that way we can get started, because I'd like everybody to get started on this project by this week, because the trick is drying. It's not so much that the project is hard, it's waiting for those stages of dryness. Alrighty, so for my stencil, I'm going to do something called a whiplash curve. It's a pretty easily recognizable pattern. It's just like this. And I'm going to make sure, so this is a pretty thin line. If I try to cut this out now, it'll be not really thin enough to hold what I want. So I'm going to just make it just like an 1/8 of an inch thick. And I'm not looking for it to be perfect. So boom. I also want a couple like little leaves just to sort of give it like a fun organic feel. So this is my really scary X-Acto knife, but that's okay, it'll work. And just like you would with any other paper, you know. Okay, my X-Acto knife is not very sharp, so I think I'm going to jump to some scissors. And this wasn't a very ethical use of paper. And I'm sort of like, man, I could have done half of this page. Make good decisions, I think, is the key we're going to learn from there. Okay, I got my curve. I'm going to finish cutting out my leaves.
Hey, Professor?
Yeah.
Okay, just one quick question. About the sentences for the sketches, is that for each one of them, or is that for just basically in general?
In general. So I want you to sort of talk broadly about your stencil ideas, basically why you decided on this particular stencil, or like why you like this pattern. And then talk a little bit about why you chose the shape you chose. Maybe let me know in that commentary which shape you're going to go with, so I have a good idea of what you're working with. And that way, by looking at your sketches, if there are any things that I think might be technically a little hard, I can reach out to you, or we can like meet up over office hours and we can sort of hash it out.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. So I just took my little stencil papers and I'm just going to dunk them in a bowl of water. I'm going to let them get a little